Australia is, again, singularly poor in known hallucinogens. I always say in known hallucinogens because somebody could go out into these places and come up with something brand new, something that we've overlooked. This is a great challenge for field workers. And then the other thing I want to say, and then I'll stop for today, is just a bit about this issue about synthetics. Are all psychedelics the same? Are synthetics in any way inferior or superior to naturally occurring hallucinogens? And if so, why or why not? This controversy began for me as like an aesthetic issue. I just felt better about taking plants sanctioned by thousands of years of use, but I didn't particularly feel that it was a strong distinction. But the more time I've spent with it, and the more time I've spent with Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphogenetic fields, the more I come to see that I really think there is a very large distinction between synthetic and naturally occurring drugs. Now, it's not a distinction that you're going to get a chemist to agree to or a materialist. It is, as far as they're concerned, DMT from a plant and DMT synthesized in the laboratory are exactly the same thing. And as far as they're concerned, a synthetic hallucinogen such as, I don't know, ketamine, let's give it the benefit of the doubt for a moment, ketamine, and a natural hallucinogen such as psilocybin, the differences do not reside in the fact that one is organic and one is synthetic. But I think that these plants take people as much as people take the plants. So that when you have a mushroom trip, you not only are having a mushroom trip, you are contributing to the future mushroom trips of everybody in the future who will take this thing. In other words, you make a small offering on the altar, and that henceforth becomes part of the setting of the thing. So that when you take one, it's like the notion of the Tao of the ancestors. When you take one of these ancient hallucinogens, you are locking into the morphogenetic fields of all the people who ever took it. How else are we to explain the fact that when you take morning glory seeds, you are flooded with Mayan imagery of stair-step cities and hieroglyphed balustrades and people dressed in gold and Quetzal finery and all this? Or that when you take ayahuasca, even in this culture, there is a very strong impression of the jungle, of jaguars, of rivers. These things are coded into these compounds somehow. So it seems to me it is, without talking about issues of toxicity and pharmacological uncertainty, it's the content of the naturally occurring hallucinogens is much, much richer. And then one last point that I want to make to sum up this geographical survey of what is available is to say, again, another research frontier is China. There is very little evidence of any use of hallucinogens in China, and yet there are clues. There are clues that mushrooms were understood, that other plants may have been used, the knowledge of which has been lost. And the Cultural Revolution did a pretty thorough job on wiping out this kind of traditional Taoist shamanic data. But a very simple way of focusing the problem is to say there has never been reported from China a psilocybin-containing mushroom. And yet I'll bet if a reasonably informed investigator were to go to southern China and spend no more than 2 or 3 months off the beaten path, talking to country people, I'll bet you could come up with half a dozen psychoactive mushrooms with a history of folk usage. It's simply the question has not been asked. Well, we are going to not have a clear understanding of the historical development of Chinese thought and institutions unless we know what their relationship to the invisible world precisely was. And I think the indigenous tradition of shamanism, which became then Taoism, which became the real substratum of Chinese religion while it weathered various late grafted variants and foreign imports like Buddhism, but that native stratum of Taoistic shamanism hints very, very strongly that there were psychedelic usage of these plants in ancient China. Okay, that's it for today, and we'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Sorry to give you such a burst of information, but this will lay the basis, I hope, for tomorrow's discussion. So think about what we didn't cover, what you hope to hear that you haven't, and then tomorrow we'll try to tie up all the loose threads. Thanks very much. Sure. Okay, it looks like almost everybody is here. There was a woman yesterday who isn't here. I wonder if she was a one-dayer or if she'll show up. Do you all remember her? No one saw her but me. Yes, she sat. Yes. Oh, she will. Okay, well,
They expected to be somewhat late, so.
it's always somewhat late on Sunday morning, so we'll a couple of people expressed interest in this week that I'm doing at Esalen, so I might describe it a little bit. It's quite different from this. It's an in-depth involvement in the mathematics of the I Ching, and then a theory that I evolved out of my engagement with that has to do with the structure of time and analysis of history as a predictable phenomenon. It has no connection with psychedelics other than that the entire thing was dreamed up under the influence of psychedelics. But it's a standalone idea, and if I'm able to control the group, I will keep it quite far from psychedelics, except in moments of rhetorical desperation. But if you're interested in the I Ching, and don't let the word mathematics put you off. I am not a mathematician, and the best mathematicians aren't either. You simply, it's just a way of talking about it and doing analysis that was very fruitful. So that's a 5-day from the 28th of this month till the 2nd of December. And Esalen has given us the big house. And a lot of people will bring their computers. There'll be a lot of machine implementation people. It'll go from Taoist scholars to assembly language programmers. And everybody will have more of a contribution to make than they suspect at the time. So
Not filled?
I'm not sure. It was filled, and then I think they switched it. So, because I thought it was going to be at Fritz. But I don't know. Call them and see. That's all I can say about that. It seems like there was something else. Well, hopefully you turned some of this over in your mind in the time that we've been apart. I certainly did, in the sense of trying to figure out what I had missed and whose concerns had not been met. And what I came up with was your interest in the specifics of time, place, and manner, which should certainly be covered because it's operational information. Talking about the various visionary plant complexes that we talked about yesterday, each one of these things has a style and a set of demands that it makes on its practitioners. And if you look at the ethnographic literature, you then see how the people who've used these things over millennia have come to terms with them, how they have accommodated themselves to these things. For instance, in the Iboka cult of Gabon, what is aimed for is early on in the involvement with the plant, a massive dose is taken, and they say it splits your head open, and you never have to take very much again, because somehow a creode or a predilection has been created, and then you are initiated into this. When you read the ethnographic literature, it's hard to believe how much they say they are taking. I mean, there's a saying in Gabon, Bawiti, which is what they call Iboga. Bawiti begins at 60, and that means 60 grams. Well, even allowing for the fact that they're using fresh root, and you might get a collapse rate of close to 50 or 75%, that still means they're saying Bawiti begins at 15 to 20 grams, which from my own experience with this stuff, I can tell you, is not even a conceivable place to begin. That's not a strong hit. That's an impossible hit. So the mushrooms, and you have to know, pharmacologically speaking, the window of effective activity. Every drug, every compound has a profile which you can imagine as a linear spectrum. Below a certain amount, it's undetectable. Above that amount, it becomes detectable first as this CNS arousal that I mentioned yesterday, and then as a full-blown psychedelic experience, and then at higher doses it begins to have toxic effects. All drugs are toxins, and people often make the mistake of thinking that if you have a toxic substance and you take half of it, then it's not toxic, because there is no you don't register its effects. But of course, everything is incrementally toxic. Now, some things are very safe, have a great range of effectiveness, well below the range where any toxicity begins to set in. Other compounds are active as psychedelics at a level just slightly below the level where you're going to begin to have toxic effects. So you want to know what the profile is of the particular substance that you're thinking of taking. In pharmacology, one of the parameters that they establish is what's called an LD50, which is a fairly unpleasant concept, which you should nevertheless be informed of. LD50 means lethal dose 50. This means we have 100 mice, and we give them an unknown drug. At the point where half of them die, that is the LD50 dose of that compound. And there's an LD100, an LD10, and so forth. What you want is for the LD50 to be tremendously high relative to the effective dose. Now, the perfect or model compound in that case is, of course, LSD. LSD is active at the 25 microgram range, 25 gamma. A microgram is a millionth of a gram. It's well below a smidgen. Now, the LD50 for lysergic acid has never been determined. Do you agree?
Yeah.
It's never been found how much it takes to kill half of the test animals. So that makes it a tremendously safe drug if mortality is the only concern. But of course, I think what most psychedelic trippers eventually realize is mortality is rarely at risk in psychedelic experiences. What's at risk is sanity. And, being nuts is not as bad as being dead, but nevertheless, it can spoil your entire day. So, and it's very reassuring, having taken a compound like psilocybin and to have become totally convinced that you are dying, to just remind yourself that the LD50 is 200 times more than you took, and therefore it's impossible, and you merely have to discipline the hind brain and take control of your fear, and then you will be all right.
I wish somebody would have told me that.
And you're a pharmacologist.
But when you're in it, you really think you're dying.
When you're in it and you think you're dying, you weren't able to say to yourself,
yeah, I did.
Now see here, no one has ever died at this dose level. And well, it is a question.
You start imagining that perhaps there was something in there that wasn't just psilocybin.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Or your heart can't bear it. I thought I had tachycardia, and I thought my heart was going to explode.
Pound right out of your chest. That you make a point which I want to elaborate on. We've talked so much about hallucination here, and always because of my particular bent, which I have unconsciously transferred to you. We're talking about visual hallucinations, but all psychedelic explorers should be aware of the concept of what is called a cognitive hallucination. This is a much more insidious phenomenon. This is quite simply an out-and-out delusion. The commonest form of cognitive hallucination goes like this. You take mushrooms. An hour and 20 minutes into it, it's getting mighty, mighty strange. And this is especially a problem with first-timers. And you realize, with the force of revelation, that you didn't take psilocybin. You took a poisonous mushroom, and now you are going to die. This is an out-and-out cognitive hallucination, which is as real as a belief. But it's not a disturbance in the visual field, it's a disturbance in the cognitive machinery. A story, a friend of mine had never taken mushrooms and was very concerned about how to do it, and got the instructions from me. Silent darkness, quiet room, stay sitting, and took them in his room in silent darkness, and at about the hour and a half point realized with a demonic chuckle that I had been kidding. I had been putting him on, and actually had told him to stay in his room because we were preparing a surprise party for him at the bar 2 blocks down the street. And chuckling to himself with this realization, he showered, dressed, and went down to the bar 2 blocks down the street, pushed open the door and said, "I'm here." And the guy behind the bar said, "Oh, really?" Well, the trip got wilder from there, because in the wake of disconfirmation of one of these cognitive hallucinations, people tend to become confused, paranoid, and upset. So you have to continuously track your mental processes, and it's really good to stick with whatever rules that you've laid down for yourself. I actually apply this technique in my own life. If I get to the place where I cannot understand what is happening, I try to think back to the last moment when I did understand what was happening, and then do what I said I was going to do then, having given up on understanding it in the moment. The practical fallout from this in terms of psychedelic research is what we call the chain to a tree technique, which is where you just chain yourself to a tree, and providing you don't hang yourself with the chain, this cuts down the possibility of doing something peculiar. Psychedelics this doesn't tend to be a problem, but for instance with Datura, the best intended and most together people lose it completely and then come back into it 12 or 24 hours later to just survey the swath of wreckage that they have cut through their own and other people's lives. I had a friend years ago, a very diminutive, attractive woman who took Datura with a couple of boyfriends, waited hours and hours, nothing happened. They finally decided to go to their homes. She walked them down the stairs, said goodbye to them at the top of the stairs. It actually happened in the Haight. And that was the last thing she remembered until she came to on the 6th floor of the federal building in the San Francisco County Jail. And the charge was assault on the arresting officer, and the evidence was the officer's thumb, which had been bitten off. So she was, an Antioch PhD in medieval literature. So it happens to the best of us. Yeah.
Can't you eliminate a lot of that cognitive uncertainty by having somebody with you when you do this straight?
Yeah, you can. The ideal situation, and always I'm only speaking from my own experience, and I may have an odd take on it because God knows I'm odd, but to my mind, the ideal situation is to have the sitter 2 rooms away, and you have a doorbell or the equivalent. Because if the sitter is with you, you start to analyze the sitter. And as someone once said to me in India, face is index of mind. And the sitter can just become an existential galaxy of possibilities because, you can read their history, their intent, their most secret thoughts, your belief in what is their most secret thoughts. People are concrescences of ambiguity that you don't want to get too tangled up with in that state unless you really are ready for the trip to take that particular direction. I don't know if it was in this workshop or the other night that I mentioned, I recall a trip I took with this English guy, and it took me 2 weeks to get his voice out of my head. It just became like this accompaniment to consciousness, this stream of sort of understated English upper-class gibberish on all subjects. And I finally, it retracted. That's called becoming a victim of the transference. All psychotherapists are aware of this. The transference is when you get dragged into the other person's system of values or delusion. There's even a name for this in clinical psychology. It's called allophrenia. Allophrenia is schizophrenic behavior on the part of normal people in the presence of schizophrenics. And this is a real problem. Your friend is put in the place, You go to see your friend to cheer them up, and your friend is not violently insane, but saying strange things, behaving in strange ways, and you, in an effort to relate to them, begin saying strange things and behaving in strange ways, and before you know it, the resident has to break in and escort you to the elevator because you're causing a problem in the ward. The transference is this phenomenon happening among people who are more or less psychologically healthy, but still it can be very disrupting. I think the sitter should be there only if there's a three-dimensional emergency. And the sitter, the notion, I like the word sitter because it's operational. It tells what you should do. And guide is not such a pleasing word. This implies control, prior knowledge, hierarchy, so forth and so on. The best guide sitter I ever knew was a wonderful old guy. He's dead now, but I'm not yet ready to say his name in public. I'm sure some of you know him. But his style was he read these paperback trash novels, and he would just sit down with somebody, give them the stuff, and every once in a while they would fight their way out of this ocean of hallucination to deliver some insight, and he would just put down his book and turn to them and say, "That's nice, now go back to the music." Pick up his book, and this guy could get 600 pages in a situation where he was nominally in charge of a dozen people who were tripping. So non-intervention, I think, and then there's the question of doing it with another person, and then the question is it going, meaning that the other person is going to be stoned too, and this has its own pitfalls and ambiguities. If it's your lover, your sexual partner, then in my opinion that's probably the best way to spend your time. If it's not, then the sky is the limit. You're going to learn more about this person than perhaps you were prepared to. Sometimes it's easy. It's no problem. Everybody stays who they appeared to be before you took off. But sometimes, the masks just start being hurled across the room in all directions, and you don't know where it's going to leave you. My approach, I guess, is one of two extremes. I guess I sort of belong to the sensory deprivation school, that lie down, shut up, silent darkness, music very judiciously, if at all, and I always do it at night, which some people find that strange, but night is quiet. The energy dies down. There's calm and still between midnight and 4 a.m. The other end of the spectrum is someone like Salvador Roquette, who, gives you 3 drugs, plays heavy metal rock and roll, then you get to see the Auschwitz films. And no, I'm not kidding. I mean, it is an effort to, so far as I can tell, drive you absolutely starkers, and I would not submit myself to that. This same polarity exists in therapeutic theories. Some schools of therapy want you to lose it, want you to weep, lament, rend your clothing, throw yourself on the floor, kick your feet in the air, and this is called getting out your stuff or working through your stuff. What I find about this kind of thing is it resonates too long. It doesn't feel like you've gotten clear of it. It feels like you have simply objectified it. But, life is an uncompleted puzzle. I could certainly change my mind. I have never felt that the primary use of these things was to cure what is called in modern parlance neurosis, what I call unhappiness. It isn't for that. It is, and again, this may be the influence of Jung in my background. Jung felt that there was no such thing as normality, that life, the task of life was what he called individuation. And he felt it really doesn't even begin until you approach middle life. I mean, you must leave the 20s behind you because they are so socially and hormonally turbulent that you're just basically trying to make sense of it on a day-to-day basis. But then you settle in and this unfolding takes place. And I really assume that we are all beyond neurosis. Not that we are not neurotic, but that we all have our own strategies and our own take on our own quirks and peculiarities. The psychedelic thing as tool is more to go beyond the legacy of the normal into the transpersonal or the suprapersonal and really view life as an open-ended domain to be explored. So I find myself talking to psychologists a lot because this is where this has been seized upon because it does perturb the dynamics of the psyche. But for instance, I don't think you should give people hospitalized for psychotic behavior psychedelics. They're having enough trouble. They are being overwhelmed by the contents of the unconscious 24 hours a day and have no tool to make sense of it. The rest of us can make sense of overwhelmment by the unconscious if it doesn't go on too long. I mean, I don't think there's any one of us who would wish to take mushrooms, arrive at the height, and just stay there. Because after 48, 72 hours, some situation would arise which would cast us into an extreme state of disequilibrium. It's more like diving. A friend of mine said many, many years ago, the yogin and sub-in, shaman, psychedelic voyager, the yogin and the schizophrenic dive in the same ocean. It's just that the yogin remembers to take his tanks along. And that's what it is, I mean, there is this possibility of inundation and overwhelmment. Well, let's return to the matter of dosage and setting. Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned yesterday how you favored organic materials over synthetic. What about taking organic materials but then refining, and narrowing them down and getting rid of all the other ingredients in the plants? Because that's our Western tendency, is to just take something, refine it down, isolate the active ingredients, and then take doses of that. Do you see that the other natural ingredients that the mushrooms or ayahuasca, whatever it is, have provided kind of synergize the active ingredients and make the trip easier or smoother?
Yeah, I think so. Rarely in a plant where you have a psychoactive compound will it occur all by itself. For instance, in the peyote cactus, there is mescaline, there's N-methylmescaline, there's anhalamine, anhaloine, there's a whole family, about a dozen of these things. Similarly, in the coca bush, cocaine and several other canes and several other active compounds. So when you take a plant, you're getting a broad spectrum of these active molecules that have a familial relationship to each other. And no chemist has ever exactly explained to me what's happening, but I think all chemists and pharmacologists are aware of the fact that natural compounds, even extracted and purified, or let's just say even extracted, are smoother than their synthetic counterpart. I recently had occasion to relearn this because there's been some amount of experimentation with 5-methoxy-DMT, which is not like DMT, but it is short-acting and creates a profound oceanic emotion. But it also, in the pure substance, there's a tremendous heart rush in the first 30 seconds. I mean, you just feel like you're in an up elevator that knows no limit. And just about the time that you figure you're going to go into some kind of emergency situation, it tends to back off. So then recently there has been this material in the underground called toad foam, which is actually 5-methoxy-DMT extracted from the glands of a large southwestern toad. Well, when you smoke that, it too is 5-MeO-DMT, but there is no heart rush, and it also doesn't last as long. It's much more benign and easygoing. Even in cases where there isn't a detectably variant spectrum of compounds present, for instance, in the psilocybin in Stropharia cubensis, really there are only two active principles, psilocybin and psilocin is the dephosphorylated ester of psilocybin, so they are basically the same compound. Nevertheless, if you talk to somebody who has only taken Sandoz psilocybin, it's much less animated and interesting than organic psilocybin. Now, the counterexample to this is when Hoffman synthesized psilocybin for the first time, he gave some of it to Wasson, and Wasson took it back to Huautla in the Sierra Mazateca of Oaxaca and gave it to Maria Sabina. And Maria Sabina said, "The spirit of the mushroom is in the little pill." And this story has been repeated over and over again. Well, my assumption simply is, Maria Sabina was a wily old lady. I mean, it's not writ anywhere that shamans have to always tell you the truth. And I very seriously doubt that the experience, I've never had the opportunity to take chemically pure psilocybin. The difference between the morning glories and LSD is one of animation and color. The morning glories, you see, I'm talking now about Ipomoea and turbina, the Mexican species. When you take them, there is a flood of Aztec, Toltec, Mayan imagery. It's just, it's uncanny. You can't believe it while it's happening, that you would see this much glyphs and carved obsidian and quetzal feathers and all of this stuff. Is it the morphogenetic field? Is it the broader vegetable spectrum of the alkaloid rather than the synthetic? Who knows? These things remain to be looked at. In terms of the theory of morphogenetic resonance, it seems to me, some of you probably follow Rupert's ideas and Rupert himself. The problem is that the morphogenetic field is very difficult for instruments to detect. And in fact, I think so far the only instrument that can detect it is the human mind. And this probably means, that it's perturbing a field that is very, very far removed from the fields associated with the 4 or 5 ordinary forces of nature. But for instance, when you go to Tikal, or in Guatemala, or Borobudur in central Java, or Konarak on the Puri coast of India, and you take these psychedelics, the past is present. You see these places at their height, and you can say, well, it's just suggestion, But I don't know. When I take ayahuasca, wherever I take it, I encounter the motifs typical of Amazonian shamanism. The jaguar, the giant anaconda, and to show you that sometimes the iconography of these compounds is not predictable, black people. And everyone in the Amazon says this, that you see black people. Well, there are no black people in the Amazon, not really. I mean, in the lower Amazon there are a few, but in the upper Amazon, a black person is as rare as a Kurd. And yet, everybody insists on this. Well, I have had this experience on ayahuasca, and to call it seeing black people is a very mild gloss on what it is. It's like being at the Apollo Ballroom on a hot evening in 1960 and Aretha Franklin is on stage. I mean, it is deep hit of blackness. Yeah, uh-huh.
So what does it tell you? What does it say?
I don't know quite what to make of it, you know. I don't know why. And Claudio Naranjo gave ayahuasca, gave harmaline to urban people in Santiago, Chile, stockbrokers and advertising executives, people who had no connection to the jungle, and they reported jaguars, giant snakes, jungles, and black people. So this, to me, is a tremendously fertile area for Jungians, for morphogenetic field people to look into. Psychics have claimed, since who knows how long, that by holding an object in their hand, they could penetrate its past states of being. Well, it's like all these other occult claims, in my experience, mantra, yantra, yoga posturing, past life recovery. For me, none of these things are possible unless I'm stoned. Then they all become possible. It's just like you just throw the switch. Suddenly mantras work. I can chant mantras till hell freezes over in an unstoned state. The precondition for empowering occult idea systems seems to be a shift in brain chemistry. And it's, to be noted that in these cultures where a lot of magic, a lot of violation of natural law is going on, there is a lot of psychedelic stuff going on. These ayahuasca shamans, say among the Aguaruna Jivaro, for instance, which is a very no-nonsense tribe of head-hunting people in the Amazon, the shamans live continuously in a state of altered consciousness. I mean, they are taking this stuff all the time. It is a food item. And what it would be like to be the shaman of the Aguaruna in the jungle all the time, taking all this stuff, it's hard to imagine, because when you just do it once, all plants have auras, all plants have songs which can be extracted out of them. I mean, they are living literally in some kind of other dimension. Yeah.
I'd like to play devil's advocate, if I can, for a minute, about this whole idea of certain plants or certain substances have certain attributes or certain places that they take people to. I've had the ideation that you're talking about, the visualization of the snakes, the cats, the jungle, the pyramids, the whole Mayan Aztec jungle, the shamanic routine on LSD, on mushrooms, on ibogaine, and on yahe. And I've had clients that had that same ideation doing breath work.
Well,
So-
yeah, this
so where does
raises
that,
this raises a real question. One of the
And
things.
the black people. The black people were on ibogaine, which I expected, but not the other part.
Yeah, I don't understand exactly how this works. I will join your side for a moment, because there's a phenomenon I've noticed, and some of you have heard me talk about it. It's possible to do this on psilocybin. It's really easy to do it on ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, in a way, is somehow more open to suggestion. These other things have their own agenda. Ayahuasca will work with you. But one of the bizarre things that you can do on ayahuasca is you can suggest a period, like, let's say, Italian Baroque. You just say it in your mind. And paintings, altarpieces, architectural spaces, balustrades, vehicles, armament, saddlery, clothing, serving utensils, bowls, pewter, candelabra, all of this stuff will begin drifting toward, and it is high Baroque. In fact, it is more Baroque than the Baroque. It's obviously what they were shooting for, you know? And then you just say dynastic Egypt.